Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, get a special guest to choose a Doctor Who story. I have to then watch and commentate, accentuate the positive, and try to guess what their favourite thing about each episode might be.
Hello Toby, and anyone who's watching or listening to this. My name's Mark Gatiss. I'm a writer and stage manager. Thank you for inviting me in. The story I've chosen for you to watch is The Macra Terror.
Well, welcome everybody to part 4 of The Macra Terror on Happy Times and Places. Well, they may seem like happy times and places, but scratch the surface and there's all sorts of darkness going on. And let's find out how that darkness manifests itself in the dark underbelly of this podcast as we select play without narration on the correctly formatted menu screen on the DVD or Blu-ray of the excellent Macra Terror animation, which we are not watching. We are watching the Telesnap reconstruction, which I would have chosen anyway, just so that I didn't get distracted by the narration. But my guest Mark Gatiss actually finds those preferable because he wants to get as close to watching the episode as possible, and there's obviously artistic license and the fact that everyone's a drawing taken with the animated version. So if you'd like to imagine us as a series of still pictures that occasionally break into moments of movement, but only for the bits where we're particularly grotesque or scary, join Michael and me as we watch episode 4 of The Macra Terror, which we're going to do so in... And we're going to do so, which we're going to do so is not grammatically correct. Although if I picked myself up on every... Well, I sometimes do. I sometimes want to, you know. But I know that you'll forgive me because it's... You know, I've not written... This is not a written speech. Why am I even talking about this? Because it's important to me. I want you to think I know my grammar, but it doesn't matter. Right. Well, that was I might even edit that bit out. I won't because I'll forget, because I'll be trying to do it quite quickly. So I'm sorry about this bit. It's just waffle and nonsense. Right. We're going to press select or play or whatever in 3, 2, 1. There is a delay there, isn't there? A friend of mine was watching this saying, oh yeah, you always say press now, and then there's a delay. And it's like, well, because there's a delay when you press play. But yes, you might well get a different delay from the delay that I get, but that cannot be helped. But we're not doing this to split seconds of timing. So we're on episode 4 of The Macra Terror. I think an underrated great, and I think it's partially because it's not a story where the Macra take center stage, although actually they've been in it more than I'd kind of thought. Last episode it was quite grabby, and isn't this organ music of Dudley Simpson rather marvelous? It's more of a horrific than a sci-fi piece of music for me, really, and I like it when, you know, horror sci-fi is rarely scary. Horrors, those eyes of the Macra are great. It's almost like you can see the veins in them. But yeah, I like that it's not spangly music. It's deep, dark, booming organ. Well, it's not booming organ. It's quite high pitched organ, but it's Phantom of the Opera, isn't it? It's grindy and scary. So, what was I going to say about the Macra Terror? I had something really important to say about it, and I can't remember what it was. Cheeky, of course. Cheeky. Now, we get a new character in part 4. Well, no, an old character. We get a character called Cheeky, who is in episode 1, apparently. Can't see her in any of the telesnaps. And why is she interesting? Well, she's interesting because in episode 1, Cheeky is credited to Sandra Bryant, who plays Kitty in the same writer, Ian Stewart Black's The War Machines, which also has John Harvey, who I'm seeing here as Officia, who plays Professor Brett. So 2 War Machiners, 2 Ian Stewart Blackers are back in the Macra Terror. Both in slightly worse parts, actually. John Harvey gets guest billing in the Radio Times for the War Machines. He doesn't for this. In fact, not even Gerton Klauber does. Peter Jeffrey is the only one that does. So slightly down in the pecking order for John Harvey, even though he's giving a better performance. I believe he was one of the... Did I read somewhere he was an early exponent for the medicinal use of cannabis. I think, is he an X the Unknown? Which Fraser Hines is also in? He might be, he might not be. You can just look at that on IMDb. You don't need me to say credits of people in things. But John... Oh, yes. So Sandra Bryant is not credited as Cheeky. So there are 2 Cheeky girls. And Officia doesn't look unlike Lembatopic. Those are all references to me that make absolute sense, but I think of them as quite modern cultural references. But I suspect they're all about 125 years old and grandparents now. But the Cheeky girls, it doesn't matter. And stop explaining jokes. Based on cultural references, nobody will have a purchase on. And if you do go, I'm feeling good because I've got the set. Don't feel good. You're in tune with the cultural references of a man massively out of time. And I said, I suspect Fraser will have had to have done some acting with a fiberglass claw there, where he doesn't damage it like poor Michael Craze does with the axe in episode 2. But Carol Keyes plays Cheeky in episode 4, and I remember in the Doctor Who archive it says, Sandra Bryant asked to be released from her contract. Now, I don't know if we've got a piece of paperwork or if that was Andrew Pixley doing guesswork, because as I say, I'm not sure there's much in the production file, if there is one at all. An avalanche of I love that, an avalanche of salt and rock cascades over Jamie and the Macra, and that won't have looked as good as it sounds in the final version, because a cascade of rock is usually some bits of polystyrene and dust. But that's okay. Let us on your imaginary forces work. I like the slight little televisual interference they've given to the controller's view screen, again, just to make this come alive a little bit. Talking about the reconstruction here, of course, but the view screen is flickering slightly. The telescreen, I'll call it telescreen, which is what it would have been in 1984, is flickering, which just helps sell it to us. These are great pieces of work, and it is a series of different archaeologies to get us something presented, with narration, without narration, and in animated form, because everybody has their special preferences, and I'm sure there's somebody going, but what they should have done, they should have coloured the black and white picture. Somebody else going, no, that's sacrilege, because we all have our things that we like, and we all get furious when other people don't like them, because that's being a Doctor Who fan. I think we're very, very well catered for. The idea that we've got the same story in 3 different ways to cater to all our different desires on one commercial release is... we're pretty lucky. Most people get whatever's on the shelf, whacked onto a disc. No, actually, there are lots of other releases from other companies that are good and remastered and things like that. But I think we do get pretty good attention. But Carol Keyes plays Chicky in this episode because Sandra Bryant has left, and you go, okay, that's reasonable. Sandra Bryant maybe gets offered a better part in something else and goes, can I go? And as Cheeky doesn't actually have any dialogue in episode 1, I don't think in episode 4 either. But again, there's lots of Tipex. It might be that she did, and then they gave it to Suna because she stuck around. In which case, Johnny Morris, the estimable Doctor Who writer, who also is a bit of a research deep diver, thinks that Sandra Bryant actually didn't appear in episode 1, but by which time the roller captions had been done. And we know that the roller captions are done in advance, because there is, like Robert Aldous, when he appears in a last-minute scene in episode 1 of the Dalek Invasion of Earth, they don't have time to redo the roller captions. They've already been sent off to be made. So Johnny's feeling is that actually they just said to Sandra, okay, you can go off and do another thing, and we'll we won't bother having Cheeky in episode 1 because we can survive without her, because she doesn't say anything, or if she did say anything, her lines have been given to Suna, and come episode 4, we'll just have a different Cheeky. We'll just have a different Cheeky girl, and it's Carol Keyes. Carol Keyes, of course, he says, of course, is not... Carol Keyes is not a real name. Carol Keyes is Luann Peters. Oh, and here she comes in now. Beautiful Carol Keyes, who is Luann Peters, who is in the Fawlty Towers episode with... is it the one with Nikki Henson? Yeah, she's in... is it The Psychiatrists, is it called? She's a beautiful blonde woman in that. And she turns up in Frontier in Space as Sheila, who basically stands there in a scene and doesn't say anything because her lines get cut. So she has quite a checkered history with Doctor Who. She comes in and replaces somebody who didn't have any lines. And she does have lines in this, but they're not individual lines of dialogue. They're doing bits of singing. So she's just one of the dancers and singers, one of the featured ones at the front. But yeah, so Carol Keyes was Carol Keyes for a bit, and I think had a single in the charts. If not in the charts, had a single. There's a difference between having a single and having a single in the charts. But yeah, became Luann Peters, who's an actress who did loads of things, but sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And this is Roger Jerome as rather unfortunately, all the cheerleaders, there are 3 cheerleaders in this episode, and they're all credited together: Roger Jerome, Ralph Carrigan, and Terry Wright. Ralph Carrigan plays lots of monsters. He's Monoid 2 or Monoid 3, Monoid 2 in the Ark. He pops up he's a sideman in the Invasion, I think. And Terry Wright is in the Mind Robber as one of the white robots or one of the soldiers. I've got a feeling a relative of his built my first website. I never met him. A friend of mine got my website built for me. But anyway, Roger Jerome who gets far more to do because he gets all the dialogue to talk to Jamie with, is sort of credited in a lump with the other 2. He should really get cheerleader leader or something. Anyway, he lives in America now, and I've interviewed him over Skype, and he's a jolly chap. Didn't have much of a career over here in television, but went over to America and has continued. Still acts to this day, and is a jolly fellow, and email him occasionally. Look at Troughton's face. Look at that dark, keen intelligence. And this is where they get to the sort of underbelly, isn't it? And an Ola is no, there we are. This is the white Macra, and you're going, did they paint the whole Macra prop right? Just white for these shots, and that's what we thought. I suppose, well, why not? They could sue it out of secrets. It's quite a big job to do, isn't it? And I thought, is that what the white Macra was in the Shawcraft thing? No, it wasn't. That was a Macra at a different stage. Johnny Morris was talking to. There's a memo. There's a little memo. There's a little props list that Johnny Morris shoved under my nose. Wrench here, control panel there, whatever. Model Macra. And so I think the Macra that we see manipulating the control panels, the head Macra, the chief Macra, which is white, which I love. But again, it's just a tantalizing thing, isn't it? There's another Macra, there's a crab, is a model. So that's a model on a smaller set because it's just seen through the window, which is, of course, then easier to do. That's not the giant Macra. And that's something we only discovered in the past couple of months, actually, when Johnny took another look at the various bits of paper that are hanging around, which, as I say, I'm pretty sure are scant. So there's so much that we would see were we to find this, and this is where Ola really comes into his own, because why have we had this sort of sadistic, and he's so pompous, he is like a sort of school prefect, he's going to be as beastly as he possibly can. And of course this is very handy, because when the pilot, who has been wavering, because he is a nice and charming and decent person, but bad things happen quite often when nice and charming and decent people do their job properly. We still need a threat. We still need somebody to stop the Doctor. Say sorry, Ola. Say sorry, pilot. He's so cheeky. It's wonderful. You need somebody still to stop the good guys from doing their bit. And of course, you get the impression with Ola that he would not need to be brainwashed in order to enjoy his position and to do his job. And I talked about that photo that they've got, because I think, having seen that publicity photo of Ola and the pilot, Gerton Cloud was brandishing a sort of iron bar, and you got, is there a scene where the Macra are sort of bursting in and they have to hit them with iron bars? No, it's just literally, it's just we've got to do a photo shoot here. Let's be quick. Dennis Gocher does a great job, because the voice gets more shrill and more extreme. It's quite difficult to imagine quite what it is the Macra are up to behind the scenes, sitting there with the control panel, pressing buttons with their claws. But that's okay. And I remember when it's interesting, because of course, again, I hadn't expected the Macra Terror to be a story about mind control, but of course you need human faces and voices of the threat, because the crab's not going to be articulate. It's not going to have a face, you can't have a conversation with it. Although, of course, the control voice, Dennis Gocher's voice, is the crab, isn't it? It's but having the controller's face in place of the face of the crab just sells that to us and helps us buy it, although it's also important there in storytelling terms. So yes, of course, Ben actually gets to be the real hero. Ben's humanity shines through. So what did that? I'm just trying to remember what a nice high angle shot there as well. Yeah, Ola is in command, and isn't there a brilliant shot of him that comes up where he's absolutely sort of stands straight up and is absolutely full of himself with a smug look of satisfaction on his face. And yeah, the pilot gets to be a bit heroic here. So that's a nice about turn from Peter Jeffrey. But yes, all a bad society needs is for nice people to do a bad chop properly and not ask too many questions. So yes, that is the model Macra that you only see from behind. Yeah, it would be ridiculous to have painted the giant Macra and to have erected a set that you only partially see. So of course it makes absolute sense now to go, yeah, of course that's a model. Why didn't we think of that? Why didn't we think it was a model? Because we didn't know and it didn't occur to us. But that's part of the whole beauty of this Doctor Who fan experience. I mean, there's an argument, are we lucky to have missing episodes because it keeps us interesting? Oh, there's the Macra's turned round. Yeah, and that's definitely different. I love the fact I love the spiny bits of hair coming out of it as well. There's a nice attention to detail in that. I know, and Fraser Hines says that the Macra was terrible. And that's where the car thing comes from as well, isn't it? Not just that it was the size of a car, it cost the price of a car, I think. And I think Fraser's particularly got his eye on it. It was really expensive and it wasn't very good. Well, he's got his eye on the money, Fraser. But and Fraser says it wasn't great. But do you know what? I just think having a giant crab in Doctor Who is magnificent. And the fact that it's not always referred to as a crab, which adds to what I'm talking about what we have to deal with, about the fact that everything is slightly fragmentary, and it would probably not quite make sense. I love that shot of Gerton Klauber in all his finery. Doctor Who always has a good line in sort of pompous officials, people, and we meet them in everyday life. Here he's the chief of the guards of a monster-ridden colony. In everyday life, it's sometimes some git who works in a shop or is a traffic official or whatever. But they're almost the worst monsters, the human monsters. At least crabs are quite cool. But it's interesting that Ola does not get his comeuppance in this. He gets defeated, but I think in a story today you'd contrive a way for the Macra to need to eat him or smash him out of the way because he's an irrelevance or something, and have him killed just before our heroes get threatened, because it's always exciting when someone gets killed and it ups the threat. And if it's somebody that we don't like either, we feel justified in enjoying the excitement of seeing somebody killed. Why are we entertained by watching people die? But we are. The death scenes in Doctor Who are part of its great appeal. That's quite a worrying thing. As Troughton got a handkerchief out, I love the fact that the Doctor has a big handkerchief, and I'm sure he's got a big handkerchief there. Now that could be from the composites or whatever, but I'm still sure Patrick Troughton. I love the Doc that he's got a big handkerchief, and I love the fact that Troughton's Doctor has sort of all sorts of different things in his pockets. I like my Doctor to be scatterbrained and mad professor. And yes, Ben is the hero, and you go, yeah, you've had your moment, and in a fortnight you will be unemployed. Oh God, isn't that awful? Innes Lloyd seems to have been a lovely man, and everybody liked him very much, and I've seen an interview with him where he's a very gentlemanly, old school sort of fella. If he didn't like you as a companion, no ceremony, off you go. And what happened to Dodo to facilitate the entrance of Ben and Polly? They fall foul of exactly the same mindset when Jamie comes in and strikes up his obvious rapport with Patrick Troughton. And yeah, Dennis Gocher's voice is great. I wonder why they didn't get Graham Lehman had a perfectly decent voice, but there's the sort of shrieked hysteria that Dennis Gocher throws into this. He was a poet as well, Gocher. Is really excellent. It's a great contribution. In fact, I remember in the first edition of Running Through Corridors, when I talked about the brilliant control voice, the editor Lars put in Graham Lehman, and I was furious because he just read the credits and saw controller Graham Lehman, and I was just like, I wouldn't have. No. But anyway, that's what happens when you write big bits of text and you don't do that sort of bit yourself. The editor's going to come in who's got a much broader thing to deal with and just, whack in a name there for clarity. But it's a mistake. That's Maureen Lane as the drum majorette. She pops up in all sorts of things. She's got a line in Superman 2. She's an extra in the Gunfighters. So here we are. The colony is happy again. And yeah, Peter Jeffrey is very, very, very good, and I like the fact that the pilot gets to take a chunk of the action in the final episode. The colony is not going to be quite such a oh yes, they want to make him the new pilot because although Ola has been disgraced, obviously the pilot has still been fired and apparently remains fired. So they want to make the Doctor the pilot. So of course there's no way he's going to do this. So he dances his way out. And the credits are going up. Did they go over this amount of the action? That's very interesting. Wow. The credits are still going, and it's wow. That. Now I hadn't anticipated that the credits would go over that much of the action, but I know that they're fastidious about their timings and stuff. What are they called? The reconstruction guys. So that's a lot of credits over a lot of non-closing titles music. Good work, Dean Handley, Dean Rose, Russ Port, for that reconstruction. Really nice job. So I have to choose two things. I have to choose a thing for episode 4, and I have to choose an overall thing. I think for episode 4 I have to choose I think Ben's contribution. I think the fact that Ben, the whole thing with Ben and getting taken over, I think the fact that vestige of loyalty and humanity remain, and that it is Ben who saves the day in that part of the story is a really Doctor Who thing. That no matter how much mind bending goes on, and no matter what dark underbelly there is, and how much manipulation, if we are told to do bad things, it does lie deep within us to grab whatever that little nugget of humanity that will always prosper, that indomitable human spirit that must always remain, and to make the world right and good, we have to dig deep sometimes and get that out and act upon it. And find that within us. Search for the hero inside yourself, even. Haha. And Michael Craze does it well, and I like Michael Craze. So it's that. It's Ben's. It's Ben doing good. A mere 2 weeks before he is sort of dumped without ceremony. Extraordinary. And the thing overall, they've been haunting me all night because they're here even on this menu. That noise. Those lovely noises. Well, I'll say the soundtrack full stop. That Brian Hodgson's wonderful winds and these really weird howls. The whole slightly intangible nature of this story I find so beguiling. There are so many things I'm not quite sure how they did. I can't quite picture how they pulled off. And yet also because so much of it is familiar with Patrick Troughton and even the actors, they're all actors that we know. And we can see, we've got telesnaps, we know what it sort of looked like. But even the telesnaps of the Macra, they're shrouded in darkness and shrouded in smoke, which means that, that will have really helped with selling the image and will probably give kids nightmares, So the intangibility that we have now is kind of apposite for this story because I think it seems to have been such an intangible thing anyway, but that draws me even more to the audio because that is tangible. But that noise, those noises, so the synthesis of Brian Hodgson's wonderful spooky special sounds and Dudley Simpson's haunting relentless organ for the March of the Crabs, Yeah, so the sounds of the Macra Terror and Ben. So they're my two things. So for episode 4, choosing Ben, Ben coming good in the end. What is Michael going to choose?
Yet again, alas, I'm going to make a wider point from a single moment. But because I know you're going to be trying to guess what I choose, I want to give you a fighting chance. So I'm going to say that my favourite thing from this episode is Jamie dancing. Why?
Of course.
Because it feels like something that only Doctor Who would do, and I adore this programme for those moments. Jamie has spent much of the previous episode and the opening portion of this one evading the slowly advancing Macra. He's been choking on gas, he's hidden in crevices, he's not been having a good time. But he escapes, he gets away, he runs into the colony, straight into the middle of a dance rehearsal. And he's expected to do a dance. A young Highland piper from the 18th century who 3 months ago was fighting on the Culloden Moors has just escaped from a giant crab, or insect, and now has to do a dance. And then does. It's very much not what you'd expect to be the conclusion of that sequence. Similarly, the hysteria of the Macra is so odd. It might be perfectly logical that the Macra have the screaming abdabs, as their lifestyle is dependent on keeping operational a pliant population who don't question multiple no-go zones or the entire economic industrial basis of their society. But that goes against how alien oppressors are usually depicted, in other Doctor Who stories, let alone anywhere else. We're used to shadowy behind-the-scenes forces, the rasping whisper over the glimpse of a hand, claw or appendage, but they're usually in control of themselves, complacent in their mastery of the situation right up until the very moment that the Doctor upsets their plans. Not the Macra. They're hysterical from the off, and it's great because it is so weird. I love the slippery nature of their name in this story. No one ever says directly or explicitly, these are Macra. That is what they are. The name slips out as something on the edges of common knowledge. Now, it's possible, given the rewritten nature of this serial, that that's an accident of the editing process, but if so, it's a happy one. Serendipitous, if you like. Their big outburst in episode 2, once they've shown us the aged control, is bizarre. The shrieking voice, there is no such thing as Macra. Macra do not exist. It's too much. And the story is all the better for it. It gives everything that happens subsequently an undertone of nervous tension. That single detail elevates what could have been a more pedestrian story and gives it a running thread of strangeness. It's an excess, it's an overabundance, it's a wonderfully Doctor Who thing, as is Jamie dancing.
Well, that was two things as well, but yeah, you touched on, and I'm glad because I did give Dennis Gocher credit. I'm feeling remarkably inadequate here. I think there was more observation wrought from that 2 minute 50 second snippet of Michael than I got out of the whole episode. I was floundering slightly and trying to distract you with facts what I knew. I should have relaxed and let the story speak for itself. And I didn't even talk about Jamie's dancing bit, which I love, and it is a sort of comedy, slightly padded scene, but I remember loving it when I first discovered it, and I particularly like the Highland fling joke because Jamie uses the dance to sort of propel himself out of the situation, which I think is very witty and fun, and yes, I love the fact that he sort of gamely joins in, and that's why Jamie is so marvelous. And I love the fact that he was probably more scared of doing the dance and of the, in episode 1 he says, I'm scared of what the ladies will do to me, than he is of being trapped down a mine shaft with giant crabs. But that strangeness is also, as I say, compounded by the whole missing business. And Macra Terror bonus from Michael. My bonus was the soundscape. Is I'm sure much more interesting.
Okay, so I get to pick a bonus thing, which might seem like a liberty given how much I've rabbited on so far. However, like Ben, I'm going to enjoy every indulgence you offer me. So I've chosen the title sequence. I know it's a matter of accident that the new title sequence happened to feature first on this serial. I think it was hoped to be ready for The Underwater Menace, and the slight rejig of the theme tune doesn't arrive until the following story, underlining how, as and when it all was. But I think there's something fitting about it debuting here. The Second Doctor was the great unknown, this step of changing the lead actor not having been taken before, and so both Troughton and the programme itself take their time getting into their groove. The Doctor is distant and gnomic in Power of the Daleks, less so in the Highlanders, but continually playing as someone else, Dr. Von Ver, an old woman, an English sentry. He's starting to come into focus in The Underwater Menace, but is still coded as other. "Look at him, he ain't normal, is he?" says Ben to a guard, who replies, "I see what you mean." There's an underlying sense throughout these stories, more of what he isn't, William Hartnell, than what he is. Interestingly, we're almost there when he meets the Cybermen, the agents of this incarnation, for a second time, though I still think there's a distance there. And it's in this story, the Macra Terror, that the Second Doctor steps from the TARDIS fully formed. It's a story almost designed to define the character of the Doctor, a regimented institution, too happy a time and place, where unthinking uniformity is encouraged and dissent suppressed. The Doctor in this story has real agency, latching onto Medoc, believing him, setting him free, sabotaging the mechanisms of the state. That speech from the Moonbase, "There are some corners of the universe which have bred the most terrible things," gets quoted a lot by fans, but that's a bold statement of intent, whereas this story gives a more convincing account of doctorishness by doing rather than saying. And actually, these episodes give us quotes. "I'm sure there's no need to be afraid." Well, I think there's no need to be afraid. "Oh, come on, let's find out," strikes me as a much more typically Doctorish and Second Doctorish sentiment. Which is a long way of saying that, though it was accidental, it feels entirely fitting that this is the first time we see the Second Doctor loom out of the title sequence, because with this story, he is indisputably the Doctor. And all that aside, familiarity shouldn't blind us to the fact that isn't the title sequence good? So, that's all I have to say about the Macra Terror, for now. Thank you for inviting me, Toby. It was lovely to be asked. I hope I haven't outstayed my welcome. Actually, I hope you're still there and haven't sambered your way out of the door while I was mid-flow. My website is michaeldennis.org, if anyone's interested in seeing what I've written to date. There's other stuff going on, but stay tuned, as we used to say. I'm also on Twitter, Michael_Dennis. I exist. There is such a thing as me.
What an excellent contribution. And in fact, I'm left feeling, as I say, slightly inadequate. But look, I do these things as live and I say what occurs to me, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting a bit behind with these, so I needed to do this one. Thank God for Michael, I say. He's totally won, and he's right about that title sequence. Bernard Lodge is an absolute genius and should be in any Doctor Who Hall of Fame. That Hartnell title sequence is wonderful. I still think it's a bit weird that there are Troughton Doctor Who stories with the Hartnell title sequence. It's a really strange thing, especially as actually we don't have the crossover either. We've just got a few that every time you watch it, we go, God, yeah, this is a Patrick Troughton story. And this, yes, he's right, this is where that brilliant. And the way that the face rips, melts and rips and falls into those brilliant shapes that I think must have looked like $1 million in the 1960s. And you see a load of 60s programs and their title sequences, and they're often just a drawing on a blackboard, essentially. Do you know what I mean? Or a really badly inlaid slightly shonky font sort of wobbling in. The Doctor Who title sequence is absolutely magnificent, and the Hartnell one is great, and then it gives way to this second one, which is great. And yes, I like the fact that Michael pointed out, and then we actually don't get the proper music till till a bit later, and even then they sometimes forget to play the right one. And I quite like the fact that there's something to look into there, and I'm sure somebody else going, well, when does this piece of music get used, or when does this arrangement get used, or when does that arrangement get used, because it was so ad hoc. But I sort of like that. I like the fact that sometimes things were just done and somebody picked the wrong thing off the shelf or whatever. But it would be great if a season 5 story had the Hartnell title sequence on by mistake and nobody noticed. But yes, that there was a lot of insight in there that I'm afraid I didn't really provide much of in part 4. Sorry. It's almost as if I am the complete opposite of the society in the Macra Terror, is that I look like this. I come across like there might be something quite interesting happening, but actually, if you tear that away and delve underneath, you'll find there's absolutely nothing of any interest going on whatsoever. So thank goodness for Michael, who I think entered into that gamely, chose a good and challenging story. Because it's one that not much is known about. I do think it's a high quality story with lots to talk about, because it does have subtext, it does have an agenda. It is trying to not just tell an adventure story, but talk about society and controlling things and the dark side of what is apparently happy and cheerful and good and positive, and also that idea of the Doctor coming in as a sort of destructive anarchist, and how we feel about that. And I do feel different about that as an older person than as I do as a younger person. It's just easy to go, yeah, tear down the state, Doctor Who's anarchist, that's cool. Whereas as you get older, you go, yeah, but you do need, who's going to take the bins out, and you do actually need the rule of law. So your anarchist stuff is quite good when you're at your pop concerts, but frankly, when you need to get to work on time and sort out a fiscally operational refuse collection system, you do have to have some sort of ship of state being guided by some people. Do you know what I mean? But nonetheless, deep down, I think we all like somebody there undermining, and the way that Troughton does it is so playful and so pesky. And it's but it's not the story we expect, and it doesn't quite look how we expect, and we haven't got an angle on it quite. So, I hope I get to do this one day, in front of a fully flowing set of pictures. In which case, I will invite Michael back, and we can do this all again with a little bit less guesswork, and perhaps I won't have to blind you with so many actor facts. I'm sorry about that. It was quite heavy on those. Well, that is what you pay for, or don't, but that's fine. So listen, I think it's probably about time this slightly inadequate and disappointing old man was it's about time some claw came and pulled him away from the microphone, which he's not performing particularly well into. So I'll obey. Goodbye. In the cold light of morning, it occurs to me my failing brain didn't cover a couple of things that I think the Macra Terror deserves some credit or points of interest for. The first is the idea of the brainwashing that Medoc undergoes. I think I touched on this, but not enough, because I think the whole idea of the colony and its correctional facilities and stuff sort of fades as, it's the threat of the Macra and the gas and setting about defeating them. But that whole setup of an apparently happy place that requires correction and treatment for dissenters, I think that's where the idea of anarchy still appeals to me, because I think I was too harsh on the concept because I've mellowed towards it as I get older. But actually that whole message of, well, what do we say about a society that says it's happy but that cannot stand dissent, that has to punish the people who simply say or think the wrong things. Now, obviously, crime has to be punished, things that physically or financially through nefarious means badly affect other people, sure, but the wrong ideas, that's what Medoc is essentially doing. He's saying, well, I think this thing exists, and it turns out he's right, but that's immaterial. I think this thing exists, and I think there's enough evidence for me to say so. And he is totally shut down and, in fact, re-educated. And that, I think, is an idea that is still very, very relevant today, particularly in terms of Twitter discourse and things like that. And how often do I see, sadly wielded by people often from my political point of view. I'm a sort of woolly liberal lefty type, where people are told to educate yourself. I think there's nothing more infuriating, I suspect, than if you've worked all your life and have lots of qualifications and have been around a bit, to be told by a 17-year-old who's read a pamphlet to educate yourself. That said, I'm also hugely aware that you're never too old to learn, and listening to my 17-year-old has actually taught me that some of the things I might be set in my ways about are wrong. However, that idea that a society needs to shut down discussion, and there are certain things that can't even be presented because they're just too awful to contemplate. Well, I'm think if we start shutting down the discussion, the presentation, the postulation of those in discourse, then we're on a sticky wicket. And I think the Macra Terror covers that quite well, and therefore, you know, it covers it as a party, a non-partisan point, because it's not about what side you're from. It's about who's wielding the power and saying that people can't say things. And I've seen it happen and to be perpetrated by both left and right. So I think it's a more philosophical point, which makes it more interesting, because I think you have to sort of accept it and soak it up and go, so, how far do we go by saying, well, you cannot say that? And the things I absolutely don't want people to say, of course I don't want people to say awful, terrible things, but then where do I draw the line? And I don't know, and I'm sure there are hypocrisies within my worldview, which is why I think it's an interesting point, and one that is worth bringing up. And the correction that Medoc undergoes, it's very like The Prisoner as well, isn't it? But, wrong think, very Orwellian, but also very off today. And I think I didn't talk about that enough in the 4 episodes, especially the 4th episode, where I sort of ran out of things to talk, and I think I just blathered a bit. And the other thing is a memory. I was going to say it's a fact. It's not. It's a memory of an incorrect fact. Graham Lehman, of course, playing the Controller, is the Time Lord in The Three Doctors, who shows the other Time Lords on the scanner the pictures of the Doctors, and he shows William Hartnell picking a rose and sees Patrick Troughton sort of put his hand to his mouth quizzically. And for years and years there were rumours, and I think it was even in Doctor Who magazine, that was a clip from the Macra Terror. I guess because they've gone Bit of Smoke, Quarry, out. It's probably some of that stuff where he's running away from the Macra or running away from the guards or whatever. And it seemed a fairly plausible thought that was a clip from the Macra. Turns out it wasn't at all. It was filmed for the Three Doctors. But for years that was the only footage of the Macra Terror that existed, except, of course, the footage from the Macra Terror did not exist. There was no such thing as the footage from the Macra Terror. The footage from the Macra Terror is a lie, etc. Anyway, thought I'd add those to make up for perhaps some of the blather that masqueraded as commentary. It wasn't 1 o'clock in the morning. It was actually 2 o'clock in the morning. Right. Sleep and forget. Sleep and forget. Sleep and forget. Thanks so much for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest was Michael Dennis, who can be found on Twitter at Michael_Dennis. These podcasts would be impossible without the support of patrons, and they include Sydney Wilson, Robin Bland, Ruben Herfindahl, Peter Burns, Peter Harness, Rob Leonard, Stephen Moffat, Richard Straw, Nick Tedston, David, pair of Davids, whose surnames are remaining redacted. So I don't know if that's by choice, Davids, but If you don't hear your surname, these Davids are the ones that should have your surname. If you want your surname, let me know. If you're happy without your surname, well, you're happy. Other Davids, you'll hear your surname in due course, but perhaps not this credits because I've been banging on too long. Jenny at Blue Box 99, Paul Carrington, Paul Cook, Peter Crocker, Rob Dawson and John Deere. And the music was by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Oh, lummy, I didn't half go on there, but basically there are patrons and you can be anonymous or half anonymous, or you can have me read your name out like I just did to a few other people there. And that's just one of the perks if you sign up for, well, anything from £3 a month upwards, although on that £3 and indeed any other tier you can get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in advance. That entitles you to advance releases way in advance of the general public. So if you're listening to this and you're not a patron, the patrons, they've heard this ages and ages ago. I've probably done commentaries now on stories that haven't been made yet. And you also get advanced releases of the Too Much Information and Indefinable Magic podcasts, but also bonus material, interviews with actors, things like that, other stuff from my archive, and the odd trinket as well. That's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. A monthly commitment is a lot to ask, but there's also Ko-fi, where you can, if you've decided you particularly enjoy an instalment, or you just think I look or sound hungry, or you're just in a beneficent mood, however you fancy to do it, there's no other commitments. It's at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. But I know times are tough, so look, what costs you nothing is to go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and to give these 5 stars and perhaps a couple of little lines of positive review, and that just helps me stand out from the crowd and be heard by more people. Believe it or not, I do sometimes not talk about Doctor Who, and that's on stage at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. in Manchester. And we have a monthly show online, twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey, which is available for free around the world. I record the intro to this every time fresh. I should just have a file where it says it, but I don't know, I may as well. And I just wanted to say I'm particularly pleased with the one I did for this episode. So that's only about 100 episodes in. I seem to have got the right content at the right pace and without being sort of repetitive. Guess what my special guest is? I never think quite rolls off the tongue. Anyway, when I did it, I was happy with it. I've not listened back to it. Don't listen back. The words I'm about to say will shock you, but I hate the sound of my own voice. I know that will probably be a surprise to many. So look, I liked it. So don't disabuse me of the notion that it was a classic opening. I think when the history of this show is written, the true fans will go, well, I think the opening to Macra episode 4. He got that spot on. And of course, loads of other people say, oh yeah, everyone goes for that. I'm much more of a fan of his opening of the Time Monster 4 when he was chewing on a naked bar, because that's what the true fans like. And other people go, not my opening, and then it'll all start all over again. Oh dear.